With the conclusion of the Trailblaze Mission Chapter, through the Petals in the Land of Repose, the true plot of Amphoreus has finally begun, and it looks like several of my earlier predictions are about to come true. Now, if only it didn't take us 26 hours to get here. By the way, that's 230% of the Lord of the Rings trilogy's extended edition runtime over the course of 3 patches, and we are still not even halfway through. Regardless, I did like Through the Petals in the Land of Repose. Perhaps I would have preferred it to be 2 hours shorter, but ultimately the mission brings its own unique spin on timeless age-old themes, such as the value of life, the meaning of faith, and the power of the human will. And these classical themes are showcased differently through the characters of Castorice and Anaxagoras. But that's not all, since version 3.2 also provided us with major world-building implications, which apply to the greater HoYoverse beyond Amphoreus itself. And I want to go over them. So, in the spirit of not overstaying my welcome, let's jump right in. Now, the finale of Through the Petals in the Land of Repose revealed a couple of details that will be extremely relevant to everything we will discuss moving forward. Therefore, I'm going to begin after the end, but the difference is that I will actually display some animation. But first, let's take a quick look at how my goat, March 7th, is currently contributing to the story. Anyway, after March 7th entered her cryostasis and the Astral Express crew lost all contact with the Trailblazer and Dan Heng due to the influence of the 3 paths in combination with Aquila's firmament, well, Tiang decided to take Sunday and go seek help from a genius witch. In the meantime, this switchy witchy witcheroo was conducting an experiment to try and contact Nous, the erudition, so that she could ask the great Eon a question. But then, the genius witch, Herta, gets also rudely interrupted by a mischievous memo keeper trespassing on her spaceship. So she decides to teach the intruder a lesson by trapping her inside a mirror. Which brings us to the present events of the story, where Welt and Sunday arrive to request Herta's help with their situation on Amphoreus. And since one of the 3 paths tied to that world happens to be that of the Aeon Fully, Herta decides to put her pesky little captive to good use by digging through her memories for any information on Amphoreus. She discovers that many factions, organizations, and memo keepers from the Path of Remembrance are deeply invested in the Eternal Land. So much so that it's internally dubbed the Private Collection of the Garden of Recollection. Intrigued, Herta uses a special warping via her 4 mirrors to project her data spirit entity into Amphoreus, guided by the memories she extracted from the Memo Snatcher. However, when she makes it to the entrance, Herta finds the Vortex of Genesis with not a single Titan constellation lit up, as if the version she is in is disconnected from the one our heroes go to from within the world itself. Instead, Herta sees 2 statues of Nikador's Titankin, along with the memory traces of Trailblazer, Dan Heng, and the Flame Reaver, who is definitely not Phynon. Which checks out when you think about it. Both Phynon and Anaxagoras speculate that not Phynon originates from beyond Amphoreus, and while we can't be entirely sure what that means without the benefit of hindsight, it lines up with the fact that Herta can only detect traces of Dan Heng and the Trailblazer, both of whom are outsiders to Amphoreus, so naturally she would be also able to perceive not Phynon since he is the only other so-called outsider we know of so far. Right there, Herta is interrupted by Lycurgus, a member of Ochima's Council of Elders, and the true mastermind behind the scenes, as Anaxagoras correctly assumes about him. Lycurgus proceeds to reveal that the 3rd mysterious path on Amphoreus is the Destruction. In my previous analysis of version 3.1's Trailblaze Mission Chapter, I discussed the possibility that a Lord Ravager may have corrupted Amphoreus' tripartite prophecy. I based this prediction on a conversation between Dan Heng and the Trailblazer, where they suggested that Nanook's Antimatter Legion had to be behind the events taking place on Amphoreus. Now, although I was skeptical that the third path would be destruction, I did strongly suspect that a Lord Ravager was involved in the story, and to my pleasant surprise, or I guess lack thereof, Lycurgus confirms it. He reveals that a certain Lord Ravager is chained within Amphoreus, which I interpret to mean that the Eternal Land itself serves as this Ravager's prison, and that the current state of the world is the direct result of that Lord's defeat and sealing. The implications of this information Lycurgus gives to Herta are massive in caliber. You see, Anaxagoras correctly hypothesizes that Amphoreus' history is cyclical in nature, and later proves it with the help of Castorice and Polyxia. More on both of them in a bit. Before completing the Trailblaze mission, I was under the impression that this cyclical condition is a byproduct of the same disaster that severed Amphoreus from the galaxy and cloaked it behind the white ribbon of light shaped like the infinity symbol. However, now that we know a Lord Ravager is chained inside this world, we suddenly have to humor the far more likely possibility, where Amphoreus' cyclical nature is engineered by design to serve as an eternal prison for this Lord of Destruction, while the 12 Titans are the jailers and enforcers of the prison. This might explain why the Titans need to be replaced by new demigods at the end of every cycle, because if the Lord Ravager is to be chained forever, then a mechanism needs to be put in place to ensure that the ones keeping watch are constantly in peak condition. And if the first ever Titans started out as mortals like the last two generations, then their minds would not possibly be able to withstand the overwhelming oppressive aura of the super emanator of destruction they are keeping at bay. Thus, to ensure the shackles remain in place, Amphoreus was put on a time loop where the world is constantly and consistently reset through a miracle of Genesis, and the duty of its titans gets passed on to a new generation of Chrysos heirs. Of course, this also means that if Amphoreus were to be quote-unquote saved by breaking its cycles and returning it to its original condition, then you would also risk once again unleashing a Lord Ravager upon the universe. And this is such a cool dilemma that our heroes from inside and outside Amphoreus are gonna have to contend with, because by granting the people freedom, you also free their eventual killer and blight many other worlds with an emanator of destruction. I am looking forward to seeing how the Nameless and the Chrysos heirs will solve this situation, but until then, let's take a look at what's going on inside Amphoreus. After some thought, the Trailblazer decides to accept Aglaya's request and take on Oronox's trial to become the demigod of time. As we all know, Mem has deep ties to Oronox, the Veil of Evernight, and her connection goes way beyond just time and memory manipulation abilities. Before the trial begins, Mem informs Aglaya that when Fully gave her to the Trailblazer in Oronox's dream, she already had some of the Titan's memories. When the Trailblazer and Mem enter the Trial of Time, Mem's speech becomes completely legible with no more memming in between her words. I'm going to miss how adorable she sounded with all those mems, but at least now I no longer need to focus on reading every time she speaks. And to further cement her direct relationship with Oronox, the Titan's speech also suddenly becomes legible inside the trial, to the Trailblazer at least. The Titan of Time has always been described as having a childlike demeanor, and after hearing their voice properly, I realized something quite sad about Oronox. Take a listen.
Mother. It hurts. Have I finally reached the end? Are the years of isolation coming to an end?
Being a Titan isn't just about wielding cosmic power, it's about bearing the weight of the world, literally. Titans are the ones who maintain and protect Amphoreus from the ever-encroaching black tide. And thanks to Anaxagoras, we now know that at the end of every cycle, the demigods ascend to become the Titans of the next cycle, which means the reason Oronox is childlike is because the previous Chrysos heir who took on Oronox's role was likely a kid, an actual child. Imagine this, a child locked at the edge of the world, tasked with guarding the flow of time, isolated for eons, crying out for their mother. It reframes everything we thought we knew about Oronox, and adds a deeply human layer to the mythos of the Titans. Oronyx tells the Trailblazer that they were chosen by the Sky Father and that Mother is waiting for them. Interestingly, the term Sky Father on Amphoreus is used in reference to the world-bearing Titan, the Great Sky Father Kefeli, the Throne of Worlds, or just Chaos for short. However, the Trailblazer clarifies that the father Oronyx is talking about is the Eon of Remembrance, Fuli. And since Fuli is the father, then Mother likely belongs to the same path. Perhaps she is a super emanator of the Remembrance. Perhaps she is Cyrene, whom Not Phynon supposedly killed. Either that or Mother is from the path of the Erudition, since you could argue that the Remembrance and Erudition are working hand in hand, or married in a symbolic sense to stop the destruction. But I think Mother belongs to the Remembrance. Regardless, Oronyx tells the Trailblazer, whom they call Traveler from Beyond the Sky, that they lack a future and would have dissipated if it wasn't for Fuli's gaze, which stabilized their form. For the Trailblazer died the moment they entered Amphoreus through Aquila's firmament, then got shot down by Nicador's lance. This is why the Trailblazer was able to touch Castorice without dying during their fight against Not Phynon. It's because back then they were already dead. They were a collection of walking memories, stabilized by Fuli, who used Mem as an anchor. Oronyx then instructs the Trailblazer to find the Hand of Shadow, Thanatos, and reclaim from her their stolen future before the passing of the 15th Dawn. Speaking of Thanatos, Anaxagoras, who if you recall split his soul using alchemy to preserve Circe's core flame when Not Phynon attacked the Grove of Epiphany, was left as nothing more than the husk of a dying man. His mind begins to drift into the outskirts of the Nether Realm, or the Void World as he calls it. But just before his consciousness fully slips away, he is awakened by Circe, who tells him that, just like the Trailblazer, he only has 15 days left to live. This is where Circe and Anaxagoras meet Lycurgus, or Lygus as he is most commonly known. Interestingly, Circe is surprised to even see him, since most Antikytherians like him should have gone extinct before the Chrysos War. As the Council of Elders Theoros, Lygus wanted to recruit Anaxagoras to his side in preparation for the upcoming Citizens' Assembly, which as Phynon explains is a democratic gathering of the people where select members get to vote on the proceedings of Ochima's important affairs, and this time around, the assembly was held to decide the fate of the Flame Chase journey. Canis of the Council of Elders argued that since Nicador was subdued and his authority claimed by Maidimos, Amphoreus' flame chase no longer had any purpose or reason to exist. She planned to make it so that once Thanatos is defeated, their authority of death would be used to eradicate death itself from the world, and potentially bring back the Great Era Chrysia, the era named after gold where humanity lived in abundance. The opposition led by Aglaia found this to be a very difficult position to argue against, since the Chrysos heirs promised the people an intangible salvation through the supposed Era Nova, where the world would be made anew. But no one can really know for sure what that would look like, while the Council of Elders, on the other hand, promised the people a return to a glorious past, renowned throughout the annals of history. By all means, their proposition was the safer of the two. Things only became more complicated when the great Prefoma, Anaxagoras, chose to side with the council, and brought Castorice with him as well. But, of course, Anaxagoras is a playable character, and therefore it is physically impossible for him to be a bad guy, so it was only a matter of time until his true magnum opus was revealed. In my analysis of version 3.0 and 3.1, I mentioned a fairy tale which Castorice recounts to the Trailblazer, where a princess transforms into a dragon. This same fairy tale permeates across Amphoreus in a bunch of different forms and is also recounted by Tribios. The events and characters of the story differ slightly from one source to another, but the gist of it goes like this. In the distant past, the city of Styxia was a prosperous haven under the protection of the ocean titan in Fagussa, the chalice of plenty, until one day an evil dragon descended upon the city, spreading death itself through the black tide. The dragon devoured the princess of Styxia, and once it was subdued and killed, the warriors slit its belly open, only to find that the poor princess had already been digested. The queen grieved for days on end, until a blasphemous alchemist appeared and told the queen that he could resurrect the princess using the dragon's flesh and blood. However, having lost memories of her previous life, the resurrected princess turned into an evil dragon herself and devoured everyone in a single gulp. Thus was the demise of Great Styxia. The real events of the story are a bit different, and they begin towards the end of Amphoreus' previous cycle. Anaxagoras was able to ascertain this truth by extracting it from the memories imprinted on Kephales's soul with the help of Circe's. It is then that Anaxagoras learns of the previous heroes who became the current titans: Naias, Calypso, Polyxia, and Chaos. Kephale is Chaos, or Chaos if you want to say his name in modern English, while Calypso and Naias are none other than Circe's and Nicador. In fact, Circe admits that Calypso of the Seven Sages was just the name she made on the spot during her first encounter with Castorice and the Trailblazer, yet it happens to align perfectly with the identity of her previous life, as she was a member of the Grove's Seven Sages. This shows that traces of her past self are still very much ingrained deep within her mind, and the same has to be true for the rest of the Titans. As for Polyxia, she had a sister, Castorice. The twins were born to inherit the authority of death from Thanatos. Unfortunately, the trial of death very fittingly demands from its taker to end the life of a family member. Castorice offered herself as a sacrifice so that Polyxia could ascend as a demigod. However, Polyxia resented the fact that her sister died for the sake of a future she would never see herself. Thus, when the time came for the demigods to become titans and weave the laws of the new world, Polyxia used her authority as Thanatos to reconstruct Castorice's soul, then took the form of the great dragon Pollux to carry her back into the mortal realm. To do this, Polyxia undermined the fundamentals of life and death, since Thanatos originally had a pair of two hands, but they were split in twain. The half representing life, the hand which sends people to their death, became Castorice, while the other half representing death, the hand that denies souls from the Netherrealm, was left with Polyxia. These actions shattered the natural cycle of life and death, denying the people an audience with Thanatos as the Titan, in perhaps the greatest irony of Amphoreus so far, died the moment she entered the world of the living, and her body fell upon the city of Styxia in the form of the dragon Pollux, where the queen and her people there found a newly born Castorice in her abdomen. Back then, the world did not yet know the concept of death. This meant that humanity was devoid of sin, but also lacked any virtue, and so the people's lives were meaningless. You see, abundance leads to peace and happiness, but if abundance never ends, well, that which is abundant will eventually lose its value, leading to mindless indulgences and ultimately decadence. Little Castorice introduced death for the first time ever, and the queen began to covet her power. Soon after, the people of Styxia became fixated with death, which brought passion to their lives, a burning passion which cured the stagnation they were in. With that being said, there is a big problem, as you guys might have noticed. Since Thanatos lost the ability to grant audience to the deceased, the souls of the dead were unable to enter the Netherrealm. So, the moment Styxia spread death across the world, they brought forth their own end. The souls of the dead gathered around the city sheltered by Fagussa, since that was where the corpse of the great dragon Pollux lay. But unable to find peace, they eventually overwhelmed Styxia, drowning it in the river of souls. The queen, having seen the collapse of her once great city, took the little girl across the snowlands into Idonia. and offered her to their high priestess Amunet, who named her Castorice. From then onwards, Castorice became Idonia's holy maiden of war, an executioner, ending the lives of war captives, criminals, and even the bedridden all the same. To end this miserable reality, Castorice had to claim the core flame of death and reunite the two hands of Thanatos together. The big problem, though, was finding Thanatos in the first place. Alas, this is where Anaxagoras once again comes in clutch, as he discovered that even before King Euripon attempted to split Nikador's divinity into 5 fragments, Naias had already done that in the previous cycle back when he was still a demigod, where he split his soul into its 5 components of tenacity, courage, sacrifice, honor, and reason. Anaxagoras understood that this was actually an alchemical process, one which is very reminiscent to the type of alchemy we see during the world quest in the Wake of Narcissus over in Genshin Impact. Therefore, Anaxa preemptively crafted a Philosopher's Stone out of his own heart and gave it to Castorice, foreseeing that it would be critical for the transmutation of the Death Titan. Since Tribios is no longer in a position where she can freely open the Century Gate, given how Trian exhausted her life against not Final, Aglaya enlisted the help of Cythera, the demigod of trickery, because according to legends, the titan Zagreus once turned the Netherrealm into his own treasure vault. So this kitty cat is the best person to deliver the package safely and on time. Of course, Cythera does precisely that and swifts away her package of 2 heroes straight to their delivery location, in one of the most creative and impressive feats of speed that I have seen within the HoYoverse so far. Now, I am not sure how she moved Castorice that fast without touching her, since at that point Castorice still had the death curse, but I suppose we're gonna have to suspend our disbelief. Trailblazer and Castorice make their way across fallen Styxia, now watched over only by the light of the twin moons, one crimson and another frozen. As expected, the souls there were stuck in limbo, and our 2 heroes encounter the spirits and memory remnants of all the characters from the aforementioned fairy tale. Castorice, Trailblazer, and Mem find the infamous Alchemist of Styxia, who attempted to bring back Pollux. As Anaxagoras anticipated, the Alchemist resorted to an extremely similar setup to that of Nikador, where he used an alchemical matrix imbued with the runes of Aquila's sky, Georios' earth, Kephalis' fire, Fagusa's ocean, and Mnestia's love. I am sure many of you guys have already heard of this technique in a slightly different form. Water, earth, wind, and fire, craft for me what I desire. The trio are joined by the soul of Maidimos, who lends them a hand against the Black Tide, and the reason he is there is likely because he was overwhelmed and killed while fighting the same enemies in the realm of the living. After all, the demigod of strife now fights at the front lines of Amphoreus, and just a short while earlier he informed Ochima that the Flame Reaver, who is definitely not Phynon, had returned. Obviously, we don't need to worry about Maidimos, since he is immortal thanks to the time his father, old King Euripon, cast him into the Sea of Souls. Therefore, this little trip upstream along the River of Souls isn't his first rodeo. The Undying King cannot really die, unless he is stabbed in his 10th thoracic vertebra, but the only one who knows about this weakness is Phynon, so we don't need to worry about that ever happening. The reunion party does not stop with Maidimos though, since Trian was also there, and she gives Castorice an adorable drawing, then makes her cry with a cute motivational speech. The final ingredient, or I guess component, to the Alchemist's magnum opus was Castorice herself, and before she initiates the transmutation, she decides to inform Maidimos that in the next cycle, both he and she will bring calamity upon the world as the Titans of Strife and Death. Maidimos tells Castorice that they have no choice but to fight till the end, and resist fate with all their might when that time comes. His words give her the final bit of confidence she needed to harden her resolve, after which he sets off to the mortal realm to continue his war against the Black Tide. Castorice then uses Anaxagoras' Philosopher's Stone to summon the great work of death, the Hand of Shadow which rises from the earth and falls from the sky, as above, so below. Thus was Pollux awoken in the form of a dead dragon inside its eggshell, the embodiment of death, dead upon the very moment of her birth. ready to be granted embrace. A very Conrian-themed sequence if you ask me. However, this whole Trailblaze chapter is Conrian-themed, so I'm gonna have to come back to all of this some other time. As expected, Pollux would be no match for the power of friendship, and the dragon would fall in battle. Polyxia was then reunited with Castorice in the Sea of Flowers, completing the trial of Thanatos and returning the cycle of life and death to order. Back in the Demigod Council at Dawncloud, the Citizens' Assembly was taking place. As the greatest hero of humanity, Aglaia relied on Phynon of Ides Elysiae to try and convince as many people to vote for their cause through his honesty and charisma. Phynon did pretty well on his own, all things considered, managing to secure a perfect tie between the Chrysos heirs and the Council of Elders. The final vote, the tiebreaker, was left to Anaxagoras, who took his sweet time in deciding where to cast it, but we all know that this was part of his great performance to buy time for his student Castorice until she returned to him with the answer he wanted to hear. And right when Anaxagoras drifts into the Netherrealm and sees his old teacher, Empedocles, it becomes apparent that the Trailblazer and Castorice succeeded in their mission. The final confirmation follows right after, as Castorice proves Anaxagoras' theory, where the demigods of today become the titans of tomorrow, allowing Anaxagoras, this absolute legend, to cast his vote at last for the continuation of the Flame Chase journey, and nothing else. The great performer then declared that he will rewrite the fate of Amphoreus and save it from its eternal cycle, and that the hero Phynon of Ides Elysiae shall become the greatest god, the inheritor of Kephile's authority of deliverance, who will recreate all the people of Amphoreus in the new world with all of their memories intact. A very bold promise indeed. Simultaneously, Castorice returns to the Trailblazer the future that was stolen from them, thereby completing the trial of time. She then hands them over the core flame of death and sets off to fulfill her duty, just as with Maidimos. In the Vortex of Genesis, the Trailblazer surrenders the core flame of death, while Anaxagoras does his part as well and surrenders the core flame of reason to the voice of the tides, bringing a good end to his collaboration with Circes, who finally got the answer to her question of what the Titans and the humans are. When it comes to Kephile's core flame of world-bearing, it is currently safe and secure in Dawncloud, supposedly at least, meaning that it is as good as surrendered for now. This leaves the Chrysos heirs with only one core flame left to retrieve. Unfortunately though, this does not simplify things whatsoever, because the final authority is that of the sky, and it belongs to the draconian god Aquila, who is the most dangerous titan in all of Amphoreus, likely matched in strength by none other than Kephile. What makes the situation even funnier is that the Chrysos heir that is supposed to take down Aquila is Hyacine, and she appears to be the weakest one so far, as long as we are not counting Tribios, who is far past her prime. I strongly suspect that Daniel Hung will play a major role in the upcoming battle against the Sky Titan, since he is the only one left who is actually strong enough to equalize the playing field. Listen guys, I like Hyacine, but she is not Sung Jinwoo. Her ass is not going to solo Aquila. She would get clapped so hard if that happens. I suspect Hyacine will be accompanied by Trailblazer, Daniel Hung, Phynon, maybe Sifera, and super duper maybe Anaxagoras, where Don Hung will finally have a chance to go all out and put his Vidyadhara High Elder powers to some good use. Also, by the way, I am not assuming this out of the blue. We've had a couple of hints pointing towards the fact that Don Hung is personally invested in defeating Aquila. This was teased in version 3.1 when Daniel tells the Trailblazer that Aquila is the one who holds the false sky of Amphoreus together. Therefore, bringing this titan down is paramount to breaching the firmament and re-establishing contact with the Astral Express, which they both ultimately want. Furthermore, when Daniel and Hyacine go to the Grove to check on Anaxagoras' research into the Chrysos heirs, Dawn tells Hyacinth how Circe's divine body reminds him of a sight from back home. We know that he is referring to the roots of the ambrosial arbor, which take the form of a dragon, and then he asks her about Aquila. So the teasers are definitely there. Like I said, Through the Petals in the Land of Repose is a bit too long for what it's worth, but it is still a good story nonetheless. And I am very excited for the upcoming chapter in 3.3, as I believe the battle against Aquila and the potential acquisition of the final core flame will be a massive moment in the story. I did skip a few details in this recap, most important of which is Anaxagoras' hypothesis that souls get recycled between every cycle, hence how humans are remade. I might come back to this if I have time, since the topic involves some cool alchemy shenanigans. As always, huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.